Hey there, it's Carly with another episode of the Expat Focus podcast. The dreaded C word has really dominated the year, but we're now reaching the end of 2020 and it's the B word that a lot of British expats in particular are worried about as they rush to secure a base in mainland Europe. Oliver Heslop from GETS, Global Expatriate Tax Services, is back on the show today to talk through where things stand when it comes to residency, benefits like healthcare, tax and pensions. We also touch on home working and the possibilities of moving to another country and taking your existing job with you. At the time of recording this, of course, Brexit talks are ongoing still, so for the most up-to-date advice specific to your situation, you can drop Oliver a message through the Expat Focus website. Oliver, this big
Hi.
deadline coming up.
Yes. Yeah. It's really funny, isn't it? Because COVID has just pushed it off the front page so much.
It really
And I think
has.
people are relieved because people got so sick of it. But now we've got a big cliff edge coming up, 31 December. So yes, it's a thing. It is a big thing, isn't it?
I have been reading online just in the last couple of days that there are calls to delay Brexit because of COVID. But at the time of recording this, that's not looking like it's going to happen, is it?
No, and it's not the. I always remain neutral politically, but it's not the personality of our prime minister either. He was voted on a mandate of just getting it done, so it'll just happen regardless, and therefore we may have to muddle through a bit next year. But New Year's Eve 2020, the UK is completely out. That is the end of it.
I was going to
And
say, so tell me, what does this mean? We've been in this transition period of a year,
yes.
2021. What are the big changes?
In January of this year, the UK left the EU. So if you imagine the continent, a political unit, that's gone. The UK is its own sovereign state again. But we said for the whole of 2020, we'll carry on in terms of citizens' rights and trade because there's so much to sort out. They said, you're out, but let's pretend that things are as they were to give us 12 months to sort it out. There's obviously COVID is interrupting everything, but when we get to this New Year's Eve, we are completely out, which means that there is no trade agreement. There's nothing. All these extra tariffs and charges are going to come in on the 1st of January. That's not going to happen. But what I'm saying really is that New Year's Eve is a big cutoff, a key date for expats, and just something to think about. And certain steps, we need to take certain steps to avoid calamity, really, without wishing to be too dramatic.
Oliver, what has been agreed and signed, especially with regard to policies that affect expats?
There's some good stuff. There's some great things about about Brexit in terms of benefits and pensions. We'll come on to that stuff. So it's looking quite healthy. There's new sets of rules about where you live and whether you're a resident, and just new rules to follow. And I've got clients who are calling me now, and they know the rules as well as I do, but not everybody does. So that's why it's good to cover them again, just in case people don't know about rights to live in certain countries and what it'll mean next year. That's what's worrying me.
And we have seen on Expat Focus's forums and Facebook groups a lot of chatter about British citizens looking to move to Europe and get their residency status sorted before the end of the year. Are they basically too late if they have not made a move yet?
No, they've still got time. I had a British woman yesterday in London said to me, I'm going out to Spain, I'm going to get my rubber stamp, I'm going to become a Spanish resident. A quick overview on the rules without any jargon. If you're already out there and you've got 5 years under your belt in Spain, France, Czech Republic, you are a resident. So you're an EU person that can travel freely anywhere. So that's that person, tick. Let's forget park them in a way because their lives won't change. Let's think of the London woman who's going to go out now. She's got to become a resident because if she doesn't, she'll be a foreigner in the EU with no rights because she won't be an EU person. That's what the big rush is about, and that's happening now up until the 31st of December. People are going to these EU states and registering locally. People say to me, what should I do, Oliver? I can't say because each one of the 27 member states is different, but they are still welcoming Brits very much. They still want you there. but you've got to register and get that residence label, and then you'll be like an EU person who can travel around the whole continent. That's the key thing, I suppose. If you missed either of those two scenarios, you haven't got your 5 years, or you've just arrived and you don't have that residence label, then it's going to be much more difficult. You'll suddenly be on limited day, less than 90 days. You're going to be looking at visas, permits, all that stuff. That's where this stampede is coming from in certain areas.
Oliver, what are you advising your clients who might be coming to you now this late in the year and saying, I want to move to Europe and get everything sorted before Brexit? Is it feasible? We're now talking at the start of November. Is it really feasible to do that before the cutoff?
I think that's a great question. I think it's more about, I always say when clients come to me and they want to make a rushed move to any other country, I always say, don't let your country move wag the dog. Because what we're really saying is there's a whole host of other things. We've got COVID to think about. Is it really realistic to go to Madrid at the moment? Boris Johnson's lockdown prohibits international travel in the main. So how would it work? How would you get accommodation in those places? But on paper, yes, Carly, it can be done, but my gosh, the stress that's involved. If you're a single person, perhaps, but if you had a family, how on earth would it work in terms of registration for schools, etc.? It's looking very impractical, isn't it?
The year for so many people has been disrupted on so many levels by this pandemic, and best laid plans have gone straight out the window. I
Yes.
don't blame anyone for essentially giving up on trying to beat the deadline.
To do it. This client I've got in mind, well, I've got two different families who are thinking about it. I think they'll do it, they'll pull it off, but the stress involved will be unpleasant. But they are very mobile people and they've lived in the Middle East and Australia. I'm sure they'll achieve it. But in terms of regulation and getting things done, and the effect of the quarantine and the travel corridors, it just makes everything twice as hard, doesn't it?
Speaking about mobility, Oliver, a little upside from this pandemic has been the real normalization of remote and home working.
Yes.
And another topic that comes up pretty much weekly in the Expat Focus Facebook groups is people looking to move to another country now that they can essentially take their UK job with them. And there's always going to be someone in that comment thread that flags your tax obligations. And it's not as simple as deciding to work for your UK employer from somewhere else. Have you had many clients this year looking to work through those scenarios?
Yeah, great question. There's something happening at the moment with one of my clients going to Spain, and she wants to get a visa, or she and he, actually, they're a couple, want to get something called the lucrative visa, which allows them to remote work in Spain, but not trigger tax. So that's fascinating to me, a tax person. So you leave the UK for good, you go to Spain, they won't tax you, and potentially you're switching off the UK for tax as well. So yes, it's definitely going on.
Is that actually possible though? I thought
I'm
that
look, I'm look,
wasn't a
I'm looking at
thing.
it at the moment. It's a biggie, but I'm looking at it at the moment under UK law. It is. I can look at each country separately. I won't bore you with the detail, but I think it is possible. I don't think it's a cheap solution. I think if somebody came to me, I'd say, well, if we're doing it for 2 or 3 years, let's get the paperwork in place. But if they said they're just doing a 12-month jaunt, I'd say the red tape involved in getting it all right, the cost of that might outweigh the benefit. But there will be, there'll be some clever planning going on. I'm amazed that Spain is saying, please come here, come and live here. I guess they want the input into their economy, don't they? They want people spending, but they are saying we're not going to tax you. So it's it's a strange world, isn't it?
What's the general rule when it comes to working remotely and where your tax obligation is?
So if you work remotely, so let's say Prague is very popular. So if you went to Prague and you were sat in your bedroom or sitting in cafes on your laptop, the Czech government would tax you because you are sitting on their soil. So they're going to tax you there. unless you can use a treaty or there are certain exemptions around, but you find that most people want to settle. I had one guy said to me, "Oh, can I hop around Hungary, Bulgaria, and avoid tax and all?" And I said, "Well, you can with little short bursts in all those countries, but again, it's a stress. It's not that practical." But yeah, for short visits to certain countries, exempt from tax. Longer time in Prague, the Czechs will tax you, and your home country won't anymore. That's as simple as I can make it, I'm afraid.
Oliver, it's not just about tax when it comes to Brexit and the pandemic and all of the consequences that we're seeing. There's also the issue of healthcare,
Yes.
which is a big one, particularly for British expats looking to establish themselves in Europe or who are doing that currently. What happens to your healthcare rights, and
Yes.
who is responsible for that?
Well, I'm not always a big fan of Brexit because it just disrupts the lives of some of my clients. But amazingly, when it comes to the whole benefits area, is very generous under Brexit. I.e., the UK and the 27 nations have agreed to continue entitlements to benefits. So British people living within the EU can carry on their entitlement to state healthcare. So if the NHS would fully cover a hip operation in Hungary, they'll continue to do so. If the NHS agreed to pay for part of an operation, they'll continue to do so. So it's very generous, and that's a very pleasing aspect of Brexit. And if you think about it, people who are 60 plus living in France and Spain just didn't want that worry of suddenly having state healthcare pulled away from them, and that's not going to happen. There's been a preservation of benefits.
That really is good news, because I'm sure it could have been very easy for the EU or the UK to just split that out and say, okay, third country rules now apply.
I think that's right, and there could have been an aspect of sour grapes, couldn't there, by certain EU states? But they are, they're very grown up, aren't they? There's no, it's practical. They want the people living there want to stay there, and the countries want them there. So yes, it's a good outcome.
Now, it's no secret that the talks to reach all of these agreements before Brexit have been greatly disrupted, not just by COVID this year, but by other tit for tat things going on, people playing politics essentially. What's going on when it comes to trade tax agreements and that sort of thing, Oliver? And what's concerning you in terms of what's still on that to-do list and that to agree list, I guess?
Well, it's funny actually because the things that are holding them up. I was reading the conversation from this week on the debates, and there's a big discussion. There's heated debates over fisheries, and the idea certain EU member states wish to carry on fishing as they are, and the UK has suddenly developed this, as we know, a strong sovereign personality, and is trying to block access to certain British waters. So for me, in our lives, the world of tax and mobility, that's irrelevant in general. But that is what's holding up the whole agreement to everything else. We want things signed at Christmas to say, right, we're a bloc outside the EU, but we wish to be friends. We wish to carry on trading, and an argument over fishing is stopping everything. It's crazy. Well, it's quite funny in a way. There's a guy on Twitter who monitors, a great guy, a British guy, sits in Gibraltar, and he monitors Spanish ships that stray into British waters. It's a huge, we can laugh, but if you're in that industry, it's a big thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Don't mean to put down the fishing industry. And right now, it's proving very important to every other tax agreement.
It is. It's affecting things as well. The other thing is that they talk about no deal, and I don't think either side really wants that. So what we're saying is that if there was no deal, there'd suddenly be an extra 10% tax on cars coming into the UK. So again, I've got automobile companies, clients, but not that many. I'm more worried about the free flow of people and their assets and their money. But again, the argument over cars is stopping us settle this other stuff.
And what about things like double taxation agreements, tax returns? How does that all get affected by Brexit? And do we know for sure yet?
So for me, that's all very easy for me. I know only because it's my bread and butter, but Brexit is not touching any of those things. So when we talk about Brexit, just and I'm talking about personal tax, just forget it. Imagine that look at Europe as a map without the European Union overlaid across it. We have tax treaties with individual countries. We have the same with social security is affected a bit by the EU, but essentially we have individual agreements with each state, and we don't have to worry about Brexit at the moment. The European Union does not dictate personal income tax rules. So I'm not too, there's a few little tweaks which we can talk about in a second that I'm a little bit worried about, but overall there's no big change on that. It's more about the right to live somewhere, residence, that's the worry. And most Brits know about that. And if they don't, I'm really glad that we're raising it today.
So what are these little tweaks, Oliver?
Well, there's a big one for me is that in Spain, if you sell your house, there's a massive tax relief. It's free of capital gains tax if you're an EU citizen. So if I'm a Brit living out there now and I'm an EU citizen, great, I sell my house, no capital gains. But after the 1st of January, if I'm not a resident, it's taxable because I'm not an EU resident. So the practical implications of that are quite massive, actually, I suppose we think about it. Retiring people, moving on, wanting to come back here, selling up either a bar they own or a holiday cottage or, their permanent residence. Suddenly, it's all taxable because they're not EU people anymore. So that's where the solution to that is, again, go back up to the top. The first thing we talked about, get yourself EU citizenship. And I am here, and immigration lawyers are here to help with that sort of thing, aren't they? Because it's can you imagine? It'd be huge, it'd be 20-30% suddenly, wouldn't it, as opposed to zero?
Can we move on to pensions and what the situation is with them when it comes to Brexit?
Yes, I've just got one thing to say. It's another great aspect of Brexit, which is that people retiring within the EU who are claiming UK state pension, it'll carry on going up year on year with inflation and consumer prices index. You might say, well, of course it will, but countries like Australia and America don't follow the same rules, especially Australia. There's a freezing going on. So if you imagine you retire and you have a state pension of about 9,500, in 20 years' time, it would be disastrously low. So again, Brexit means, the EU means retiring to one of those states, and the British government are going to still increase year on year your pension as if you were still at home. So again, that's great, isn't it?
It must be so reassuring for so many people who, like for years, it's been a bit of a pilgrimage, hasn't it, for British people upon retirement to look to somewhere like Spain or France, take their GBP pension and live it up in, their later years.
I think also because I know lots of Brexiteers, they're just so delighted about it all going through. And I have to say to them, very in practical business terms, the NHS news is fantastic, and this is fantastic. The countries have come up with a practical, beneficial understanding, haven't they? They're not punishing Brits for staying in their EU states.
Oliver, what other issues are still on the table that need to be worked out that concern expats when it comes to Brexit?
I've got one more big thing to talk about, which is inheritance tax. Just briefly, this has been floating around since about 2015. And there's a rule in the EU that says if you're living in any country, regardless of where you're from, you can use something called the Brussels 4 rule, which you can put your hand up and say, I may be living in Hungary or Sweden, but I wish my will to be regulated by UK law. And you just have to invoke that law. So your will has to say that. So I love that rule, but it's got to be in your will. If it's not in there, then in the case I just said, you'd fall into Swedish rules of inheritance tax. So it's such a simple change to your will. But if your will doesn't take account, say, I'm just holding my hand up, I know what this rule is, and I want to ignore where I'm living, I want to invoke UK law. Your will has to say that. I think that's a great concession, but it's one that you have to make sure you're up to date on, isn't it?
And why is it so important for some people to follow UK law in their wills and not the law of the European country they're living in?
Yes, so in the UK, we've got huge tax-free limits for couples, interspousal transfers on death. and our rates are fairly beneficial compared to certainly the Nordic countries. So the other thing is, European countries with a socialist history will have higher rates of inheritance tax. So the UK
Hmm.
is, not hugely generous, but not extravagant either. So it's certainly worth looking at. But there are certain reliefs in terms of gifts you can make during your life. That's one of the things. We have these things called exempt transfers, PETs, potentially exempt transfers, whereby you gift monies and property to your children in your 60s and 70s. You'd avoid tax on death potentially. Those laws will not exist across the EU. So this is a really it's very appealing, and it's familiar, isn't it, as well, to stay within your home tax laws. And it's quite unique, really. You can't do that with other taxes.
So, Oliver, what's your recommendation if people realize that something on this list is something they need to address? Is there an urgency to sort things out before the end of the year? Or at this point, should you just hold steady, focus on, being healthy, getting through?
I would say probably 80% of this list, my firm can do. There's a few immigration things on there. I'm a tax advisor, but I would say just drop me a line and let's have a discussion. It's interesting. We talked about stress and impracticality. It may be too late, but as I say, there are families who are still pushing and who are trying to make the move, so it's still doable.
It will be interesting to see what people choose to do over the coming months. And also, fingers crossed that these latest lockdowns happening across Europe do the job, ease the pressure on our health systems, and allow people to hopefully have a bit of a break at Christmas.
I think that's right. We just talked something about delaying Brexit. It's just so tempting, isn't it? And I don't have a strong view either way. On the one hand, you think, well, we are where we are. Let's just get it. Let's just get it finished. But if you look at it, you think, well, another 3 to 6 months would be nice, wouldn't it, to do these things properly? But there are certain parts of the English Parliament who will always be asking for an extra year. So it's just it's an impossible discussion, isn't it? Who knows what the right thing to do is?
Best way for people to get in touch with yourself, Oliver, to have one of your free tax consultations and understand their way forward.
If you go on the Expat Focus site, there's a form. You can contact me. Let's have a chat. It's all free. We don't bill for phone calls or initial chats. It may just be yes, okay, you're fine, and hopefully that'll comfort you a bit. I've had a guy write to me today who said he wants to help with residence planning in the Bahamas, and I just can't do it. But I've got a network over in the Caribbean that can. So we've got this huge maze of all these different countries and experts that I've built up over the last 25 years. So we can certainly direct you,
Yeah, so if you can't help, you probably know someone that can.
as they say.
Oliver, always a pleasure to chat. Keep safe and well.
Thank you, Carly. Cheers. Bye bye.
That's it for today. Expatfocus.com is where you can head if you want to get in touch with Oliver. Simply click on the Services tab at the top and go to UK Tax Advice. You can also find all of the links to our Facebook groups on the website. Be sure to check out our other episodes. We interview experts on all aspects of life abroad on this podcast. If you like what we do, please leave us a review, and I'll catch you next time.